Hi there, I'm James McTaggart, an educational psychologist, and this short film is explaining some of the long-term effects for brain development and behaviour development for children who've experienced emotional abuse. It's a terrible thing to experience, and even worse, it can have long-term effects in how they experience the world and how they interact with other people. So I'm going to try and explain why that happens in the next couple of minutes. Essentially, what is happening is children are adapting to the environment they grow up into. And this means developing the kind of brain and body they need so that it matches that environment and promotes survival in it. So children are doing their best to adapt and cope to the environment that they are growing up in. And that then leads to long-term changes, some of which are less helpful in the long term. And understanding how this happens shows us what to do to help. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time looking at the child level at why these effects happen. So let's start with a really bad spot the difference competition. What's the difference between a child and a crocodile? Well, there's loads and loads of differences, but the main one I want to highlight just now is the differences in growing up. So if you're a crocodile, child development basically consists, you start as a small crocodile, and then you gradually become a bigger and bigger crocodile. And if you manage not to be eaten by other crocodiles, essentially you become an adult crocodile. There's not much else goes on apart from getting bigger. Let's compare that with humans. So humans, over the course of, I don't know, up to 25 years or even more, we start as babies, we develop into children, we become teenagers, and then finally we become adults. And actually that process of development keeps going. There's evidence it carries on into our 60s. And you can see there's huge changes along the way. And just looking, we know that babies can do different things to toddlers, can do different things to teenagers, are not yet at the full adult level of development. So why does this happen? Why is it different? Why aren't we like crocodiles? So we don't, toddlers, crocodiles don't have to be toddler crocodiles and teenage crocodiles. Why do we have to go through all of that? Well, I'm going to try and explain the whole state of science on child development in 20 seconds. There's about 2 million plus articles and books about child development, but it comes down to two very simple questions. Firstly, as a child interacts with their world, they're asking, what kind of world is this? And that leads to the second question, which is what kind of brain and body do I need to develop to do well in it? And that's why human beings are so successful as a species. It's why we can live in so many different environments, because we're born not complete, and then we develop to match the environment that we're born into. So if you let me just take 10 more seconds, let's imagine an infant. What kind of world is this? Well, it seems to be a world where people play and chat with me a lot. So as I'm becoming a child, I need to develop lots of language in order to do well in that world. Okay, let's consider a different answer to that question. A different developing infant. What kind of world is this? It's a place where people don't talk to me that much. And so maybe I don't need lots of words. It's expensive in terms of brain development to develop these things. Maybe I should develop other things instead. And that's one reason why children raised in adversity often have gaps in their language development. So typically, children growing up mostly experience manageable stress. Things they can cope with, not too bad. They're hungry, they get food, they're upset, they get comforted. The stress of life is made manageable for them. And so what do they need to develop in that kind of world? Well, proportionate stress reactions. So we get really stressed about really big things and not that stressed about much, much smaller things. Children growing up typically experience support to cope with stuff. And so they need then to develop stress regulation, because we know that a big deal might become a small deal because someone's going to help us, and we learn to develop problem solving through the support that we're given. Children growing up experience unconditional love. And so if you're in a world where people like each other and are kind to each other, then it pays to develop a sense of self-worth. It pays to develop trust of others. They grow up against a background of stable routines. And so then it makes sense to start thinking about the future, because the future is going to be much like now, so we can start to plan for it. We develop the brain systems that enable us to think about consequences, because there tends to be a typical cause and effect reaction. We do things, certain other things follow. So we develop that consequential thinking, which is so important for learning, but also for managing behavior. And lastly, children experience appropriate amounts of autonomy. They get choices. They can decide to do things. And in that kind of world, it pays to develop confidence and cooperation. So let's look at the contrast. Under conditions of emotional abuse, the developing child mostly experiences too much stress. And in a really stressful, difficult world where you never know what kind of bad thing is going to happen, we need to develop all or nothing stress reactions. Because if it's not what we expect, chances are it's a bad thing. Children with emotional abuse often experience a lack of support. They don't experience that problem solving. So it's a world where you're all out for yourself, you have to respond quickly, and so they will develop more acting on feelings rather than thinking before they act. They might experience no love, or what is even more confusing, just variable love, hot and cold. Sometimes they're loved, sometimes they're not loved. And in that very unstable kind of social world, it's adaptive to develop a lack of trust in yourself and a lack of trust in others. They might experience a lot of control. And so if we're controlled a lot, it's adaptive for us to develop strong abilities to resist. And we almost become risk-taking in that resistance. And they grow up experiencing a world which is unreliable. It's not stable. It's not routine. Things seem to happen almost randomly. And so it pays to develop acting in the moment, dealing with the thing in front of you, and paying low attention to the future and thinking about consequences. So hopefully that contrast is clear. And the main reason I want to talk about it is it gives us loads of hope for intervention. So suppose a developing child, infant, toddler, mostly experiences too much stress. Then it looks like I need to develop all or nothing stress reactions. But let's suppose there's some intervention. Let's suppose we find spaces in that child's world where they can experience manageable stress. It might be through a parenting intervention. It might be stuff we do at school. It might be stuff we do at nursery or something in the community, or just having another trusted adult who can help them regulate their stress. Then, hang on a minute. The message is changing. I thought this was a world where I just experienced too much stress, but now I have more manageable stress. So what does that mean? That means that I can develop more proportionate stress reactions rather than just all or nothing. So if we understand development as adapting to the kind of world we find, we can see how by changing the world that children encounter, we can change the course of their development. So here's the whole model to look at for a while. If our world is one way, then it's adaptive to develop in a particular way. If, by contrast, in a world of emotional abuse, it's like this, then it pays to develop in other ways. So I hope that's a useful model. I hope that explains some of how emotional abuse affects brain development with long-term consequences. But I hope as well it shows how powerful we can be to intervene. By changing the child's world, we can change the course of development. So thanks for watching.